So my name is Partha. Good morning and welcome. I'm the head of alumni relations. As you are aware, every month we have started an initiative called Saturday Musings on the third or fourth Saturday, where we get industry experts, we get alumni, students and faculty to interact, some kind of a platform to interact with each other on various topics. That's the whole idea. And we started in Jan. Our first program was on demonetization. This is the second program that we are holding today. It's on innovation in the FMCG sector. This program, though we have physically not too many out here, is being live streamed globally. So we have people logged in from different parts of the world. And welcome to all of you logged in remotely. When we talk about innovation, leadership, strategy, these are kind of words that lends itself to various kinds of interpretations and meanings, And each one of us interprets it the way we want to. To the best of my knowledge, in terms of what I have heard, the innovation, one of the broadly accepted definitions is that it is something that is new, something that is of value, and something that can be realized. So the next question you'd like to ask is value with respect to whom? Who decides what is valuable? So evidently, when you talk about innovation, you're talking about value for others, not for yourself. So if you're very good at cooking and you cook a wonderful dish at home that no one likes, that's not innovation. So you have a context. Essentially, you have a context to innovation. So if the context is not there, there's no meaning in what you do, right? So that lends itself to various kinds of interesting perspectives. So if you look at, for instance, if you look at a context, so which means innovation requires a context. So if you take, the question that you could ask yourself is, can I develop context that will promote innovation, right? That is a question that you could throw this particular question. So which means that, can I have those points of intersections that can I create, for example, within a company, where domains and disciplines merge, right? That lends itself to developing multiple ideas. Increases the possibility of innovation. And from that specific question, you have a very famous book by Franz Johansson on the Medici effect. So it all depends on where you focus your lens. Right? Innovation has many layers in terms of how you can look at it. So if you have a context and you have someone who's innovating and doing something, the next question you could ask yourself is, are there skills that I can develop in a specific context that will help the process of innovation, right? When you ask that question, then you would probably start asking yourself, can I develop skills of observation, cognitive skills or association, questioning skills, experimentation, and there you have a book, Innovator's DNA, Clayton Christensen, right? So it all depends on where you shift your lens and how do you look at innovation. You can also flip the question around and say, what stops organizations from innovating? What stops people from innovating? So there are, once again, once you ask that question, you can actually write another book. Then you could say the ingrained value systems that you have, resources and the priorities and processes can itself become a barrier to innovation. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Clayton talks about where listening to your customer too much itself can become a problem, right? So essentially, we have many flavors, many perspectives of innovation, and it's a very exciting topic. And it's wonderful that we have a great session lined up for you. Today, this session has been split into two parts. The first part is a talk, setting the context to innovation, by Professor Sai Yayavaram. And the second part is a panel discussion. We have a wonderful set of panelists who represent companies that are known for innovation, right? Let me do the structure of today's session is that the first 40 minutes is the talk, and then a free, open-ended panel discussion anchored by Sai. I would quickly do an intro of the keynote speaker and the panelists, and then Sai will take over the session. Now, Professor Sai Yayavaram is a keynote speaker today. He is a chairperson, corporate strategy and policy area. He's an associate professor and IIMB chair of excellence. He had done his BTech from IIT Madras and he's from IMA 94 batch. He's done his PhD in strategic management, McCombs School of Business, University of Texas at Austin. Professor Sai joined IIMB as an associate professor of corporate strategy in July 2013. Prior to joining IIM Bangalore, he was at the National University of Singapore for 9 years. He worked as a consultant at the Tata Strategic Management Group, Bombay from 1994 to 98. His research focuses on technology management, complexity, and strategic rents, and has been published in Administrative Science Quarterly, Strategic Management Journal, and Organization Science. Professor Sai currently teaches competition and strategy to PGP students and strategy content to doctoral students. He also conducts executive education programs on strategic management on innovation for senior managers. He is a senior editor of Management and Organization Review and an associate editor of IIMB Management Review. He is currently a member of the editorial review boards of Strategic Management Journal and Global Strategy Journal. Welcome, Sai. The panelists we have, starting with Kapil. Interesting part is today we have 3 panelists, all of them are PGPs straddling the 90s show. Okay, so we have someone from the 91 batch, the 95 batch, and the 99 batch. That's wonderful. Wonderful mix, it's a generational mix. So Kapil Kamboj is the youngest, and he belongs to the PGP 99 batch. He's a Vice President, Customer Development and International Business, J&J Consumer India. He works out of Bombay. Kapil is the head of sales at J&J Consumer India, a company that he has worked ever since he joined as a management trainee in 1999. So he's been for 17, 18 years with the same company. He's a veteran of that company. And J&J, as you all know, is well known for innovation. Kapil and his team have made significant wins in the e-commerce and specialty channels. He served in multiple roles across India. His experiences include leading North India as a regional sales manager, being the sales leader on integration of J&J's first ever acquisition, ORSL, and successfully integrating all sales support function into an integrated commercial excellence group. He was instrumental in the launch of Johnson's Baby Milk Soap, relaunch of Johnson's Baby Soap, and introduction of the babycenter.com, India's parenting website. He led the team that relaunched India's #1 teen brand, Clean and Clear, in 2008. The brand went on from number 7th position to number 2nd position in 3 years' time. During a 2-year assignment at the worldwide headquarters, Kapil led the hair and diaper care strategy and innovation globally for Johnson's Baby. He led the global introduction of a new hair care benefit-led portfolio strategy that resulted in growth revival in many mature markets. Kapil is married to Karishma, a fashion entrepreneur, and they have 2 kids. He's an honors graduate in mathematics from Government College, Ajmer. Welcome, Kapil. Nirupama Kaushik, the other end of the 90s, the 91 batch. She was here just 2 weeks back. So welcome again. She's a consulting partner and practice leader, GMR, Qualitative and Innovation with Brandscapes. She has a wonderful background, very interesting background, including schooling in 8 cities, because she belongs to the defense background. And she had a stint in academic counseling, a master's degree in journalism and communication, training in facilitation and problem solving, and yes, PGP from IIM Bangalore, incidentally. Okay, and she has a total number of 24 years of experience, primarily in market research, along with short stints in computer education and advertising. She is a specialist in qualitative research and has worked on creating proprietary protocols along with key clients. Her special area of interest are behavior change, consumer behavior, consumer drivers, and NPD and innovation. I guess NPD is new product development. For blue sky ideas, early stage testing and refining concepts. She's a trained facilitator who has conducted more than 60 workshops. Nirupama has experience in leading and cascading strategic change with organizations and auditing executive skills to set organizational norms and standards. She's on the accreditation panel for Unilever's Qualitative Researcher Accreditation Program. She's worked with TNS Global, Research International, Market Probe, and MARG, and has experience in working with clients such as Levers, Unilever, Hindustan Lever, Danone, TVS, Renault, Intel, LG, Samsung, Hyundai. List is long. Domain expertise, qualitative research, innovation, NPD, market research, brand strategy, shopper and retail. Category experience, consumer goods and services, auto, IT, rural research, regional and international research. Welcome, Nirupama. The last person on our panel is midway in the 90s. He belongs to the PGP 95 batch. He joined ITC as a Chief Operating Officer for Dairy and Beverages of the ITC Foods business in July 2016. Prior to that, he was Head of Marketing for the Foods business of Dabur India Limited. In a career spanning over 2 decades, he has handled senior responsibilities across brand management for personal care and foods businesses and also in sales and pricing. He joined Hindustan Lever in 1995 after completing his PGP from IIM Bangalore. He handled various responsibilities across sales and marketing for Unilever for 11 years in India and overseas. He was a senior marketing manager at Yum Restaurant International, where he handled the Pizza Hut brand for South Asia from 2005 to 2007. So welcome all of you, and Sai, let's get started. I invite you to take over the session. Thank you so much.
So as Partha mentioned, I'm a professor of strategy. So my broad area is technological innovation. Not really an expert on FMCG sector. So all the issues about FMCG, we will have the panelists talking about that. So what I'll do is I'll talk about innovation in a broad level. And the purpose of my talk is to sort of set the context for the discussion that will follow. As Partha said, the word innovation is kind of a buzzword, means different things to different people. And what I hope to do is to sort of narrow down some of these definitions so that we have a common language that we can use for the discussion that follows. So a very brief outline. I'll talk about the importance of innovation, talk about innovation in India, and then talk about the different types and patterns of innovation. So first, importance of innovation obviously is quite important. And I think all of us here, the panelists, the audience, we are convinced about it. That's why we are here on a bright Saturday morning. But let me still spend some time talking about why innovations are important to sort of motivate the discussion that follows. So this is a list of the top innovations of the last 35 years, just the last 35 years. And this is a fairly long list. These are technologies like the internet, broadband, computers, mobile phones, email, a whole set of things which just came only in the last 35 years. If you look at how we spend our time, all the time we spend on WhatsApp, Facebook, checking out news stories on the internet. Of course, we use all this for our work as well. Everything has changed in the last 30 years. So the broad point I want to make is that innovation can have a huge impact on how we conduct our lives. The problem with us is we like new things, but we also get used to novelty very, very quickly. And we sort of tend to take innovation for granted. So I'm just putting up this list to show you that innovation can have a very broad impact on society. So the first point is that it has a very broad impact on society, and naturally there is a very broad impact on economic growth. If India wants to move from a sort of a low to middle income country to a higher level of income, we do have to focus on innovation, and that is the way we can improve the levels of incomes within the country. Now going back to a bit one level lower, which is the importance for the firms that we work for. Again, innovation has very important competitive implications. It wasn't so long back that we strategy professors were using Nokia as an exemplar of product innovation, product differentiation, and now suddenly, of course, the company has pretty much gone out of existence. So innovation can create success stories. Innovation can very suddenly change the fortunes of companies like Nokia and BlackBerry. So a lot of success and a lot of failure depends upon innovation. And overnight, we could have new industries emerging and old industries suddenly going out of business. For example, currently print media is under a very strong level of threat. It has a pervasive influence. So typically, when we talk of innovation, most of the time the emphasis is on the high technology sectors. But of course, if you look at even very traditional mature industries like textiles, even now a lot of innovation is happening for textiles. Insurance, kind of a staid product, but even now companies are launching new kinds of insurance products. Transportation is totally ripe for very disruptive kind of a change. We are talking about electric vehicles, driverless cars, energy. Again, a lot of changes can happen. And finally, of course, the context for today. I do have a question map. I'll come back to that later today. Yeah. Okay. So again, emphasizing the importance of innovation for companies. IBM did a survey of CEOs asking them what are the sources of a sustained economic value, or you can talk of a sustained competitive advantage. If you look at this list, human capital and customers are obviously the most important. But if you go beyond that, you can see that quite a few of these factors are related to innovation. Again, emphasizing the point that innovation is quite important for many companies. So the bottom line, innovation isn't everything, it's the only thing. So just to paraphrase a famous statement, winning isn't everything, winning is the only thing. So in that context, we can see that innovation often is the only thing that makes a difference to long-term sustained competitive advantage. Okay. So I usually do a short survey, probably not appropriate for this group, but I usually ask managers in a classroom, how many of you are involved in innovation effort at your work? Typically about say 30 to 50% would raise their hands, and then ask them typically how many of you should be involved in innovation work? Answer? 100%. That's the basic point, that innovation is not just for someone in an R&D lab or some specialist, but it is for everyone within the organization and every aspect of your life as well, both within a firm and outside the firm. Okay. So before we proceed, again, just to provide some definitions and be clear what we're talking about, let me draw an important contrast between what is an invention and what is an innovation. So invention is basically the act of creating or developing a new product, or it can be a service, of course, and you create new knowledge from new combinations of existing knowledge. I'll come back to the point very shortly. So you're bringing something new into being. It's been created, and you judge the success by technical criteria. For example, you develop a new engine, how much of a horsepower does it deliver? So what is this idea of a new combination of existing knowledge? So pretty much, I think Partha mentioned the Medici effect. The basic idea is that a lot of inventions are created when you take existing pieces of knowledge and combine them in novel ways. One of my favorite examples is basically this. This inventor put together a tin box, a broom handle, a pillowcase, a pillow cover, and an electric fan to create what? Vacuum cleaner. This is exactly what this person did. So this was an inventor who was a part-time inventor, was working as a janitor. Inventors typically don't make money, so they work as janitors as well. And he was asthmatic, and so he was having problem with dirt. So he created one of the first vacuum cleaners. So this is a very broad idea. If you take almost any invention, if you dig down, it will be something which is already there. It's just a novel combination to create a new product. So this is an invention. What is an innovation? So innovation is to create a commercial product. So here we are not talking about something which has been just created and brought into being, but there is something about a use. Unless it is being used, Partha also again mentioned this point, we're really not talking about innovation. It is something which is being used, and you use commercial criteria. You might develop a car engine with a higher horsepower, but if customers don't really care about it, and they're not buying that particular car, then that's really not an innovation. So you use commercial criteria to determine the success of the innovation. Going back to the story of the vacuum cleaner, so James Spangler was the inventor. He sold the idea to his cousin's husband, William Hoover, and then Hoover went on to establish the Hoover Company. And these days, the word Hoover is used to basically as a common word for vacuuming, like you clean up something, you say you hoover it. And what did William Hoover do? He basically took this idea and figured out how to sell this product. Vacuum cleaners in some way have been there for some time, even before James Spangler. William Hoover hit upon the idea that door-to-door selling will be very effective. And he basically used that idea. Compared to whom we consider as peers, like China or Malaysia, we are doing much worse than the other countries. Of course, on many other surveys, rankings, India does poorly, whether it is ranking for football, corruption, doing business, India doesn't do well. But in this specific context, let's try to see what could explain this poor rank. So this innovation index, this is the question that I want to ask. I'll bring it up for the panel again later today. So this innovation index is essentially looking at the output and the input, and of course, across the two there is a ratio. So basically, we can look at the output and the inputs which go into innovation. With respect to output, let me take one widely used measure, which is the number of patents which have been granted. And since US is the largest market, many companies tend to patent within US, and therefore, the number of US patents is a fairly good indicator. Of course, not every innovation can be patented, but often these patents tend to be fairly highly correlated with the kind of innovative products that are being launched. US, of course, is one of the biggest. This is Japan. The other countries are going fairly well, but India is fairly at the bottom. You can see the difference in terms of scale, really, really far behind countries like India and Japan. But of course, there is also a positive story here. I'm just zooming on the bottom countries and over the last years, and you can see that India did indeed take off, starting up about 2005. And especially in the Bangalore context, a lot of these patents are being created in Bangalore. And India has finally caught up with Israel, population 5 million, pretty much the same as Bangalore. But we finally caught up with Israel, and pretty soon I'm sure we'll overtake them. And again, China is beating India hands down on one more dimension. China is also growing rapidly, but it's astonishing that about 2004, India, China at about the same level, but you can see the contrast over the last 10 to 15 years. But there is a positive story here in that there is a lot of work which is going on. But also, again, some qualifications. We've done some additional work to see the kind of work that is being done in India, especially in the R&D centers in India. A lot of this work is kind of an R&D outpost. There is a global R&D being done by an MNC, and the Indian, they are hiring Indians because Indian R&D is, they can hire R&D engineers at a lower cost. So a lot of this work is also for the global corporation, not specifically for the Indian consumers. Of course, we do have exceptions, but the broad story is that still a lot of the work is basically as an R&D outpost. Okay. So in terms of input, one of the most basic inputs is how much money are you putting into R&D, and again, the news isn't all that good. If you look at the R&D spending as a percentage of GDP, Israel, of course, is the startup nation. Astonishing 4.5% of the GDP is going to R&D. Korea in recent years, Samsung, other companies investing a lot of R&D. US has historically been pretty high. Again, China is closing on to US on another dimension, close to 2%, but India is lagging far behind, less than 1%. So as an innovation scholar, it's like a basic puzzle to me. Why are Indian companies reluctant to spend on R&D. Again, this is something that I'll ask the panelists. Because as I said, like, if innovation is good, is great, why are you not spending money on R&D? So that's a puzzle for me still. Okay, so the same dimension on a different scale. Here again, we have R&D as a percentage of gross domestic product. One input is R&D, the other input is scientists and engineers. Again, normalized to the people within the country. India is again on this scale less than 1%. China is close to 2. US is close to 2.5. Israel is 4. The same data. But you can see on this dimension again, there is a feeling that we have lots and lots of engineering colleges. But at the end of the day, if you count the number of engineers and scientists per million people, India is much lower than China. Obviously, a lot lower than many of these Western countries. So we do need to hire and train a lot more engineers and scientists. This also gives you the absolute amount which is being spent on R&D. So China is spending, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 times more than India on R&D, and US of course is a lot more. And sometimes just the sheer amount of money you put into it does make a big difference. Okay, so we need another campaign. In addition to Make in India campaign, we do need a Think in India campaign as well. Okay, so let me spend a few minutes talking about the types and patterns of innovation. So very broadly, we can talk of a product innovation, a process innovation, or a strategic or a business model innovation. Typically, when we think of innovations, we think of products. A Post-it is a famous example. So this was a 3M engineer who failed to create a glue that will work well. It doesn't stick very well. Later on, they figured out that's actually a good thing, and they created the Post-it notes. Of course, beyond products, there is also process innovation. It can happen in multiple sectors. We have a local Narayana Hrudayalaya for heart surgery, where they've shown that through process innovation, not only can they achieve lower costs, but they can also improve the success rate as well. So beyond product process, there is also innovation at a strategic level or at a business model level. The Apple App Store is a good example. Now, this distinction is especially important in the Indian context, because a lot of the innovation that happens and that is needed is actually within business models. So India is like well behind US, Japan, Korea, other countries in terms of the penetration level for lots of products. So all we need to do is borrow quite a few of these products and make sure that they are available for the Indian consumers. So a lot of the time, if you look at even the success stories from the recent few years, Flipkart and so on, most of these are about business model innovation and not really product. So we need to basically do a lot of exploitative innovation and not necessarily explorative. Of course, that is in the short term. As India moves from being a low income to a middle or to higher, we do have to focus on product innovation. And in some sectors like say IT, there is definitely a dire need for Indian companies to move from these kinds to this as well. Okay. So there are other classifications of inventions. First is there is this very important difference between an incremental versus radical or breakthrough. A lot of the time when we talk of innovation, we are really talking about radical and breakthrough because that is the sexy stuff. Like, that is what catches the eye, the Apple iPhone and so on. But if you look at innovation at a very broad level, a lot of innovation is actually incremental. So there is no reason for us to look down on incremental innovation, because what incremental innovation does is over a long time, a little bit of increment over time can become a major change. My favorite example for that is cars. Any radical innovation in the last 100 years? Not really. But if you compare a car from 1920 to 2017, there has been a very dramatic change over time. Of course, at this point in time, there is potential for breakthrough radical innovation. But if you look at just 100 years, a series of incremental innovations have dramatically changed the car as we see today. So therefore, this is definitely quite important. Another category is sustaining versus disruptive. Now, the problem with the word disruptive is Clayton Christensen defined it in a very particular way, but the word disruptive has taken on other meanings. So, let me just clarify what Christensen means. So, in his language, a sustaining innovation is one where the existing competitor does quite well. So, new innovation comes in, the existing competitor just takes on and does well. A disruptive innovation is where the incumbent has a tough time adapting to the new innovation. As Partha said, one of the reasons for that is companies listen to their customers, and because they listen to their customers, they fail to realize when a new technology that is going to take over comes in, and therefore, that sort of disrupts the industry. The broader idea of disruptive innovation is that basically it is disrupting the industry, but the more technical term for that is just a radical or a breakthrough. So, there is a kind of a confusion here. For the academic literature, disruptive has a certain meaning, but for the broader audience, disruption means something else. Finally, again in the Indian context, there is jugaad versus systematic innovation. I am going to define jugaad as anything which is not systematic, and basically I am going to diss it. So, what are the problems with jugaad? So, a lot of Indian innovation happens through jugaad, we take a lot of pride in it. This is a good example. This is espresso machine. A pressure cooker is going to give the steam for it. But is this really going to help? If you define innovation as bringing a product into use, is this really going to help? So, problems with jugaad, it is based on individual ingenuity. A lot of inventions happen because of individuals, but to go from invention to innovation, you typically do need organizations. The days of the lone inventor are pretty much gone. A lot of innovation is done by companies, whether small or large. It really is one single person. Second, there is an inadequate scientific or engineering base, and in 2017, where science and engineering has really progressed, it is very tough to come up with great ideas which do not have a strong scientific or engineering base. So, this tends to be more craft than science. Finally, it is difficult to solve complex problems. One person can't solve complex problems. You need an organization for solving complex problems. And finally, this is not easily scalable. One person might do it, but if you want to really bring this product into use, you need an entire organization. Okay. So, one last thing that I want to address, innovation is, we are talking about something new. It always means that there has to be some element of creativity, and when we talk of creativity, can you make it systematic? That is a kind of a paradox in there, right? And again, I am going to ask the panelists about this, but my very quick answer, yes, it can be made systematic, and the whole idea is that it will not guarantee success, but it definitely can increase the odds of success. And the way to make it systematic is to follow some kind of a framework. Quite a few are available. I will just highlight one particular one. This is by Hansen and Birkinshaw. So, they present the concept of an innovation value chain. Basically, there is an idea generation, conversion, and diffusion. Within idea generation, we are talking about creation within a unit. And a lot of the time, as I said, because there is a combination of ideas which results in an invention and innovation, you do need cross pollination as well. And I think we are going to have an example from J&J on the cross pollination. And increasingly, companies are realizing that it is not just about in-house. A lot of innovation can come in from external sources. So, these days there has been a lot of talk about open innovation, the idea that you are not going to do it all by yourself. You are going to rely on a network of partners, customers, R&D labs, educational institutions to do your innovation work as well. And these ideas, once they are generated, they need to be selected, they need to develop, and finally, they need to spread. And each of this is a fairly difficult task by itself. One big takeaway from this model is the idea that this value chain is as strong as the weakest link. For example, if selection is weak, that means that your entire value chain is going to be weak. So, you can use this model to figure out where you are weak within your organization, improve that, then something else becomes the weakest link, then that becomes the focus of attention, and so on. So for figuring out how well your company is doing, you can ask these key questions, and then you can use this performance indicators to figure out how well your companies are doing. So that brings an end to my talk. So we will move to the next part of the agenda, which is the discussion panel. So the panelists can please come over. I'm a strategy scholar, so yesterday I went and talked to one of my marketing colleagues, said, what is innovation in FMCG? And his response was very blunt.
In an FMCG context, because you do not have new to the world examples, because the first 35 lists that you put in, unfortunately, didn't have a single FMCG reference. Yeah, but I think we shouldn't be dissing FMCG on that account. It just means that innovation is harder to do. So what I did was I put this to the test, and I asked about 35 researchers over the last 3 days to tell me if they wore their consumer hat, could they identify innovations? It was hard to do because most of them were, like Professor said, packaging innovations, which are, by the way, quite useful, yeah? Or about taste variants, or about reach and distribution. So, but the good news is on the back of that, though we had to scratch our heads really hard, we could identify 5 or 6 examples which we thought were FMCG innovation in India for India. I've personally worked on 2 of them, so I'll probably want to talk about them. But the first and the most interesting example is you do know about the deficiency of iodine in this country. And many years ago, iodized salt was a fantastic way of actually answering that problem with a social kind of a dimension. Even better, I think about a couple of years ago, maybe it's not found commercial scale as yet because it's a rural product, but the most innovative thing that I have heard in the last 2 years is women continue to suffer severely in rural areas from iodine deficiencies. And did you know there's a product called an iodized bindi available? Because that is the easiest way of making sure that a woman gets her dose of iodine every day without forgetting. Now for me, that's an extraordinary innovation, which probably begs scale. On the other hand, I think a modest commercial success, I think Kapil and Sanjay can back me on that. I think a brand which many of you in the audience have interacted with, I have certainly, Paper Boat. Now an outstanding selection of products, which I don't think that under one roof we had seen together. Everything that comes from our culture, from Amras to Ampanna to every product that is from our culture, brought back to us in the best packaging I've seen in years, very, very emotively put in communication terms, right? So now how sustainable Paper Boat is and how much they matter, you know, how much they continue to do is there. So I think sustainability perhaps is the reason why a lot of innovation drops off the FMCG radar. But it just to challenge the point that there isn't original thinking, there is a huge amount of original thinking available. And the third and the last example I'll talk about, again, Sanjay is familiar with it, he's from HUL in the past. The distribution network, which was already so strong in India, how did we go past the last mile? And one of the ideas that Professor put in those top innovations was tapped into, it's called microfinance. And for those of you who haven't read up about the Shakti Ammas are actually a whole rural outreach of HUL to identify women in a village who would serve as the distribution point. They were meant to increase distribution, but they also sort of ended up increasing the social transformation scale of the village. And today we have a lot of empowered, 25,000 plus Shakti Ammas in different parts of India, right? So just those 3 examples to say that, yes, few and far between, more power to them. We need to think harder when we talk about FMCG innovation. Yeah.
Sanjay?
Yeah, so I like to take very extreme views. So let me take Fair & Lovely as an example of innovation, a brand I worked on a long time back. So you would say, what is the innovation in Fair & Lovely? It's a fairness cream, right? But if I take Professor Sai, your second slide, which is about taking GPS and WhatsApp for whatever as innovations, I would say for me the biggest filter is, am I making a material difference to the life of the consumer while commercially making some money. Let's take Fair and Lovely. Now you would say it's a fairness cream, what's the big deal? But you have to go and ask, let's say a girl who's 17 years old, living in rural UP, what a brand like Fair and Lovely means for her. The fact is, if you come from a middle class family in North India and you are dark, you are doomed in the family, in society, in college, in your peer group. And here is a brand which was launched 27 years back, which has made that woman, that girl, much more confident when she's going out. So I would argue that it's an innovation, for example. Whereas to you, it's just, for many people, just a fairness cream with titanium dioxide in it. So I think if you're making a material difference to the life of the consumer, to my mind, that is innovation. Let's take other examples. Let's take, for example, ITC products. So, I mean, today the fact is that most of the atta which is sold in the country is unorganized. So you can vouch for the, let's say, the quality or the authenticity of the purity of the wheat which is being used. By doing something as simple as basically packaging that into a brand, by doing, let's say, good processing and packaging, you're able to give a consumer her daily bread, which is ultimately very nourishing and safe. So I think putting a technology filter in innovation is not the only filter that one would put. And there are many ways, ultimately it's for the consumer values that really matters.
Thanks. I'm going to echo some of the points that both Ms. Kaushik and Sanjay made. When we talk about innovation, we have a lot of Steve Jobs in our minds, right? Fundamentally world-changing technological breakthrough, that is seen as innovation. But innovation doesn't have to be only that. All of us in FMCG, as Sanjay said, we're in the business of providing consumers new value and deriving value out of it. Right? And we do innovation, we deliver innovation to the consumers in so many different ways that it does not feel like world changing. But to your point, Professor Sai, over the years so incremental that it changes the lifestyle. I'll take an example which is outside my space in terms of the places that I compete in, or my company competes in. In FMCG, the innovation that the street looks at, so to speak, is in three spaces: molecular, completely new molecules, products that come out; format, which is packaging largely; or structural, the product itself changes structure. Very rare to happen except in one space, which is in food. Right? When ITC launched Bingo, they were just doing chips, but the way they did chips was just they changed the substrate, that it was not only potato chips. They made a new basin flavor or a substrate that made it up and made triangles out of it instead of red. Now, what value does it add to the consumer? Beyond a point, nothing, except for the first time that they're partying, it's a little bit of joyous moment, talk about it, have a bit of fun around it. And that's great value to that consumer at that time, right? Versus something that can be enduring and lasting. The last format in innovation that Indian FMCG saw actually is the Scotch Brite sponges, right? After that, you haven't seen really a new format or structure get introduced with change. But look at that from 10 years ago, how housewives, habits of cleaning their kitchen, maintaining the kitchen have changed just by introduction of one sponge. Now, this is where FMCG actually excels at. The 35 list that Professor Sai showed, I counted off, there were only 3 technology items that FMCG hasn't yet adopted as an innovation: robotic surgery, stems, and antiretrovirals. 32 items on your list have been co-opted by FMCG in doing something for the consumer. Whether there's apps that brands like ours have as a conjoint for the experience, right? You use a product, you have an app that tells you about how to use the product. Whether you have GPS-enabled technology that tells you where to sell where the consumer is. We have a menstrual hygiene business, right? And it's a taboo subject. There are not a lot of people talk about it. And those who want to talk about it want to do it in a cool fashion, don't touch the pickle kind of campaign. But there's innovation behind that. We use mobile telephony in the villages of UP, offering girls to call an anonymous helpline to talk about menstrual hygiene. Now, the widespread expansion of mobile telephony in the last 3 years gave us the opportunity to bring that to life. But we have hundreds of thousands of girls coming out of not knowing about their menstrual hygiene, having to drop out of school because of taboos around it, just because we could provide them that access, not the product, the business of selling the product we were in for 30, 40 years already. But just the access that mobile telephony provided so many consumers to know about, the category, taboos around it, and then get comfortable using the category, whichever brand they chose, is life altering. Now that's innovation for them at least, right? So multiple examples that one can share about how FMCG does really well in co-opting stuff that happens in the technological space. And then the other point, an academic point, so to speak, maybe for your benefit is, I think we have a narrow definition of FMCG. We think only atta, dal, chawal, lotions and goobs that you put on yourself, soaps and lotions are FMCG. I take an academician view and say anything which is a fast-moving consumer good is FMCG. This is FMCG. This is the fastest growing FMCG category in India right now. And the amount of innovation, this is an iPhone which gets counted off as the most innovative product, but the space that is seeing most innovation is what in Sanjay's hands right now in an Android space. The amount of innovation that goes in that platform, coming a lot out of India actually, low cost innovation that provides customers new experiences and benefits. And there are smart people who are monetizing it. I think it's a fascinating space that India, with its Jugaad mindset, is actually doing a lot of innovation in.
I was about to tell Professor, don't diss the Jugaad space so much, because India's greatest innovation is the missed call. So, people are blown away when you call an American and you say that just wait at the airport and wait for the driver to give you a missed call. He said, what's that? I'm like, you'll soon figure out, and it's amazing. So I think that to your academic classification, FMCG is actually not Jugaad, and it's not radical, but it is in the space of what we call thoughtful innovation. It's really about making differences to people on the ground, understanding very clearly how they use that product, and what would make that life a little bit easier. So it's not as dramatic as he rightly said, but I think that's not a reason for us to disregard. It's also, therefore, becomes very quickly the way people learn how to do it. So when you talk about habit change and behavioral change, I think it's much more difficult in FMCG to change that than to change it in any other, because the rules of the game are taught to us by Apple or Android or whoever, but that's an acquisition. But try and tell somebody who's cooked for 35 years in a particular way, or washed dishes in a particular way, that you need to change your behavior in order to adapt. So therefore, companies have to find innovative ways. I think from my point of view, I give you an example from detergents. There have been two fairly strong innovations, again, with varying degrees of success. One came from Surf, which was about in response to water, which is really a stressed resource. And when they said, you can wash in one bucket of water. To my mind, there was tremendous R&D work behind that. And enormously successful. Of course, Indians being Indians, only the water-stressed places in Chennai took it on as compulsion. And the rest of India was saying, I enjoy washing in 3 buckets of water, why should I wash in one? But that's an Indian defect rather than an innovation defect, is what I would argue. And we're not very environment-friendly in the way the West is. And the more we become that, the more innovation you'll see in that space. And the second comes from a brand that's quite close to my heart, Rin. Rin, for all of you who are familiar with it, has a wonderful stain removal property. Unfortunately, it mushes a lot. It's very soggy. So when we worked on this innovation space, and there were a lot of R&D people, obviously, involved, but one of the ideations that we worked on, I'm talking from, and we were very clearly instructed that the formulation of the product would not be touched or issue that a consumer has at this point in time. And therefore, an innovation must actually answer a job. It's, unfortunately, a lot of people do innovation for a demographic, and they do it for matching a competitor, yeah? While that is what the marketplace demands. True innovation is really about answering a job. So the more you're able to answer a job, the more you're able to innovate in a meaningful way, changing. And to the extent that FMCG innovations have done that, I would say they've actually transformed the way people feel about their dark skin, or about washing clothes, about washing dishes, about simple biological facts like menstruation. So thoughtful innovation is not as glamorous or sexy as technology, but I assure you that it exists and it's kicking and moving us forward.
Pick up what Ms. Kaushik is saying. Changing behaviors and habits is very difficult. Those of us in consumer know that it takes decades. I mean, in my little time that I've spent in the industry yet, I may have seen only 1 or 2 trends change fundamentally, habits change fundamentally, right? And I'm sure Ms. Kaushik count of not a lot many either, right? Because habits changing is difficult. And which is why FMCG innovation does not appear as blockbuster from the outside, as some of the technology innovation does. An example that I'll cite of something that I know we've been at for 10 years. Now, those of you who've been young parents ever or are young parents, that you know that you care about your baby's health, nutrition very much. So nutrition and health is the number 1 item. Sleep is the number 2 item, amongst the top 3 to 5 items across cultures. And young parents and young mothers find it almost apologetic and guilty to say their own sleep also they care about, right? They won't admit that much, but it's a real issue. Getting the baby to sleep through the night well and finding sleep for yourself is an issue that is primarily unresolved for years of parenting care, and especially increasingly when nuclear households across the world where support systems are difficult to find. It's a real issue, because if babies don't get good sleep, they won't have good growth. Growth hormones get released only during sleep time. Okay, and now we've been at something that helps solve this problem. Using our healthcare expertise, we've developed a regime of products, uses the fundamentals of aromatherapy, touch therapy, and then just a clinical regime following a routine, okay, which helps kids sleep faster and better. So makes them go to sleep faster and makes them sleep deeper through the night without awake. Now it happens, in a way there are boundary conditions around this, because you can't use anything which is sedative in nature, because you don't want to risk the child, right? And the mother is not going to let anything which is sedative in nature come close to the child that young in age. Regime is changing habits. You have to tell people to do this, a particular regime through them every day for several times. And then there's a bit of science in which aromas you use, are they clinically tested, not. Now we've been at it for 10 years, okay, at least in my time. When I was in the example that at the US, we launched it for the first time. We relaunched it last year back in India again with an improved set of products, a stronger regime with stronger clinical trials behind it. Now that's where we co-opted technology, because it comes with an app that you can use to have lullabies which are selected scientifically, because they're supposed to provide the environment that will be calming and soothing for the child. Okay, it tells you which regime steps you followed. Absent this technology, we would have found it very difficult to do it, because then there will be just any bunch of a wash and a lotion and another product that people won't know anything about. Now, it hasn't changed habits still, and maybe in my lifetime it won't change habits. In India, mothers would still bathe the babies early in the morning and not have a night bath regime in my time. But when they do, they would have discovered a new life habit that solves one problem for them. And sometimes, to the point that you go ask consumers what they want, they can't tell you what they need. And that is why innovation in FMCG appears to be incremental, because we tend to answer, finally we are a business, so we tend to answer what they would value immediately, right? So we are chasing 1 shade lighter creams, all of us do, because that's what consumers will immediately value, right? But if you can fundamentally think out of a device that actually alters skin complexion, there's not immediate value in it today, because it's so fundamentally different, which is why it doesn't appear from the outside.
If I may just add one more bit, because innovation, FMCG has been the frontier of actually taking them to the masses. I'll talk about one product which ITC has launched, which is Ashirvad Sugar Control Atta. Now, basically, India is the diabetes country, capital of the world. We all know that. And what the team did is basically take inherent Indian seeds and make an atta which controls the glycemic level shoot up after you have a meal. Now, typically that's high R&D, but it's taken to the mass audiences where everybody can enjoy it. So I think there are many benefits that FMCG allows consumers to benefit from. It's how it's basically insightful and how you can bring in some basic habit changes there.
I think that's so true. You have to be listening very closely to the consumers and almost sensing what they don't sense. So I think in FMCG you actually come out with innovations which ahead of what they are aware of. And as Kapil says, that when you're aware of it a lot ahead, it's a struggle when they don't see it, and you do. I think I started working on functional foods about 15 years ago. And the first sets of products that went in were not successful. And functional foods, as you know, is a way of delivering nutrition or cholesterol or diabetic or other kinds of. This work began more than 15 years ago. And I think today we have some successes, but as Kapil said, it's a long road. It's a really long road. One of the things that should happen is the way we listen to consumers, therefore, and not ask, has to change. And I think that there I'm very happy that in the last 4 or 5 years, the amount of immersions that everybody in all these companies does, right? And the amount of emphasis that's placed on actually understanding rather than immediately running to a product. So if you understand the needs and the problems, there are a bright set of R&D people who can give you products. But if you're not watching very intently what is happening, that's where mobile technology is helping us. Today we're using neuroscience to see responses to communication and packaging rather than just what people tell us. So first there was the generation of conversation, then there's been a generation of observation, and now I think it's implicit. So I think that those crafts also sort of rise as and when consumers evolve. But talking of what Sanjay just said, there is this famous anecdote about how you respond ingeniously to a situation. So for example, it says that, that's a famous story, so you probably have heard of it at some point in time or the other. The Japanese apparently are they're very fruitarian. So the Japanese inherently like things which are healthful and so on. And they have this special fondness apparently for watermelons, right? And watermelons were hugely successful as a fruit being sold off in the US. But in Japan, for some reason, they were not selling as well. And when all the investigation was done, it was found that the Japanese fridge, on average, is much smaller than the US fridge. And the size of those US watermelons is not exactly going to make the cut. Now, there was a consumer need, there was marketing sense as well. But ultimately, somebody thought about it and said, how do I get, and the grocery stores in Japan are much smaller. So they could not display or stock watermelons. So there was a lot of work done between marketers, farmers, some consumer, and lo and behold, somebody found out that when the watermelon is growing at a particular point in time, if you were put it into some specific kind of material, you get square watermelons. And square watermelons sit well on shelves, and square watermelons fit well in Japanese fridges. And lo and behold, it took off. Now here, it wasn't even about a very extraordinary requirement of being meaningful to society, which is responding to your immediate environment. Yes, finding the solution to that requires technology and some amount of joining the dots, but all innovation is joining the dots anyway. But it's just about that sensibility, rather than say, let's sell you bananas instead. That's easier because watermelons are so hard. So it depends on your response to that situation, yeah?
So quite a few points. I've noted them down. I'll see if I can go and convince my marketing colleague that there is innovation in the FMCG space. Okay. So let me build on one of the points that Nirupama raised about paperboard. So this is a mature industry. Innovations are hard to come by. But do they pay off? As you said, paperboard is selling a variety of products, but there are huge questions about whether the company can be profitable. Yeah. So do innovations pay off in FMCG space?
I think to the extent that they raise the floor of the category. And today I think in India, innovations must help us consumers articulate their aspirations and their requirements better. So from a pure consumer perspective, every innovation that makes life easier, better, or helps me to gain more out of that, and I think every Indian is hardwired to get more out of everything, including 25 paisa from the guy who sells coriander to you. So to that extent, I think it's helped us do that better. Ultimately, I think they must meet the market test. But I think what Paperboat has been able to at least attempt to do is to show that it doesn't have to be all brought in from the West. It isn't that I'll have to start selling you orange juice. I can give you panna. I can do Jaljeera, and there is a way to do that. And just because it's Jaljeera, it doesn't have to be the guy down the road who sold Banta Soda to me. So I think in doing so, they were able to do that. From a researcher's perspective, what innovation does very strongly, irrespective of market success, because that parameter has to be met, of course, is enhancing your brand equity. Who knew about Paperboat? And I think in one fell swoop, innovation helped them to create that identity as an innovative company, and that's taken them far ahead in the scheme of things, because suddenly we realized that one of the ways that people jumpstart brand equity is actually innovation. So the value that people ascribe to a brand rises. I've heard descriptions in the past, for example, Philips very often is classified as, well, that's an innovative company, right? And head for head, if the same product got imitated as well, we were just researching, for example, some weeks ago, air fryers. That's an interesting innovation category. I didn't talk about it because I don't believe the origination was India. But you will find that consumers will give first rites of passage to Philips in that case, because they do know it as a company that, in FMCG, because that innovation is, as like Kapil and Sanjay said, care for the consumer, it will directly affect the brand equity component quite strongly, to my mind.
Yes, so I think the success of innovation, as you said, does it pay off? Does it pay incrementally to your top line, right? And the only time it will, when the consumer is willing to pay for it. In the last 2 years, for us in consumer globally, J&J consumer globally, the component of innovation to our total growth has doubled between 16 and 17. So it's actually grown 80%. The component of innovation to the growth has grown 80% in the last 2 years in consumer and J&J consumer, while our projects have dropped 20%. So we are in the process of trying to make those innovations bigger so that the consumers sees greater value, do them faster across the world, and that's something that for somebody like us is both an opportunity and an imperative, because we can't fragment our energies trying to solve many small consumer problems, and we want to solve those which are material to the consumers, and they'll be willing to pay the price for it, and do it fast enough so that, like any other large FMCG, we obviously face local competition everywhere, so we'd rather do it first in every market than have people do, because the point that you raised before, there's very little IP around consumer FMCG innovation, because a lot of it is co-option of what exists in the technology space already, or it's incremental and it can't be really IP. So doing it fast is something imperative. So yes, we've seen value in innovation and we actually purposeful behind it. Can't tell you exact figures, but the amount of innovation that's going to come in the consumer, from J&J consumer over the next 3 years is multiples of what we've done before, and the value that is ascribed to it is significant as well. The other space that we see value coming out of innovation is when brands get strengthened. So each of the innovation, so to speak, the product launch or whatever incremental space things that you've done may be very small in the scale of things, from a total scale of what your brand is. But if it contemporizes your brand, right, and for that reason, consumers would love your brand more and pick up more stuff from your brand, right? Just the example that I used about Johnson's Baby, the bedtime regime. Now, bedtime by itself won't be a blockbuster sets of products the way things are in India for some time. But if that helps me talk to mothers and make them realize that Johnson's Baby is a contemporary, it's not only a heritage brand that's been around for 125 years and known for product quality and superiority, but is invested in cutting edge technology that helps mothers live their lives better and care for their children better. Our hope is that it will endear them to Johnson's Baby, the brand, a lot more and we'll derive value somewhere else, not in the bedtime innovation. Right? Okay. So
I think there was one concept about which cars use a lot about lifetime value. That's probably the concept that FMCG innovation should perceive itself as adding to, particularly from the brands which have, because they're with you all your life actually. So as long as they make those efforts consistently and their direction, and like Kapil said, I don't think you have a choice not to innovate. You may fail several times, of course, but I think that the answer is to do it faster, better, and then not get trapped into some kind of generic category catch-up game, which happens all the time. But I think, at least from what I see, the jury is no longer out on it. You innovate consistently. How much success you are getting in tangible terms versus brand terms versus your strengthening your own R&D is a point to be seen. But I think lifetime value is a concept that FMCG should logically talk about much more when it talks about innovation.
Just on that R&D point, I mean, you'll be surprised to learn, for example, that FMCG actually, like taking on J&J, is a huge amount of investment. We probably, ITC, for example, has the largest food lab in India, in Bangalore. You'll be surprised we have 135 PhDs. You'll be wondering, to make a atta, why do you need a PhD? So that is what, because basically that's the meeting ground of science. Because ultimately food is all about what are the natural resources you're using, be it wheat, be it potato, or be it juices or fruits. So give you a small example how technology can be used. The fact is Maggi has been and it always will be probably the market leader. But today we have a brand called Yippee, which is a far strong number 2. And there's a basic insight from the child which it comes. The children, when they eat noodles, you have seen in Italian restaurant, how do they eat? They don't eat like this. They eat like this, right? So they hold the noodle and then they slurp it in. That's the insight, right? I'm sure a lot of adults do, right? So that's the insight Yippee did. So basically, the technologists in, let's say, this company, what they did is they took the entire noodle, they worked with wheat science, and we made a noodle which is basically circular. So when you open a Yippee, and you're nodding, so when you open a Yippee pack, it's a circular noodle. So when you cook it, it doesn't break. You don't need to break it and cook it. So the child can actually enjoy every bit, every piece as a long one. Now you may think it's simple, but the amount of effort it required to go back to wheat processing, buying wheat, making it, cooking it, is something which is different.
Okay. Yeah. The follow-up question is something which I raised as a puzzle that I'm trying to address. If you're so convinced that innovation pays off, so why is India lacking so much in terms of putting in money into R&D? Of course, the companies that you work for are probably outliers, but if you look at it at a broad context, so why are Indian companies not putting in enough money into R&D and innovation?
I'd say there are 2 parts to that answer, especially in the spaces that we come from. And Sanjay currently represents an Indian company. I still am at the MNC. There are 2 parts to it. One, I think in the FMCG space, the most and the fastest innovation happens in the food space, right? Because tastes are local. You need to innovate, localize, and contextualize your product faster. So even the biggest and the most successful global brands would always have local innovation. And I don't know whether McDonald's would show up their R&D behind McAloo Tikki in that data that goes in there.
Okay.
But take Yum Foods or take McDonald's, they have one of the most localized portfolios across the globe for some of the most globalized brands that they are. And Coke's portfolio is very localized, besides just the Coke brand, right? And so is Nestle. So that's one space. I don't know whether it shows up and it's not costly innovation beyond a point, right? It's because it's not that cutting edge technology, and it's a lot of co-opting of science that exists outside and bring that into product. That's one reason, perhaps it gives the appearance it's not significant investment. In the space that I am in, especially personal care, household care, largely dominated or a greater share of voice and share and market share by large multinational brands. And increasingly, we are discovering that many consumer habits and insights are global. And their context, there's some context which you can, by incremental innovation, how you go to the market, how do you market it or package it, you can localize it. but fundamentally consumer insights are global in many, many categories. And therefore, our investments appear out of global R&D centers, wherever they are, right? And our game is more in going to speed to market faster, going to most markets, sooner, rather than waiting. And that seems to be happening in the last 5 to 10 years, that whatever launches in the Western world comes here much sooner. And of course, technology is helping, social media is helping in a way, because those consumer needs, which seemed to be niche, very niche before, now there's a greater market space because consumers have greater awareness. So again, it won't show up if our personal care, beauty R&D centers in Shanghai and Singapore, and it's solving for problems of teenage girls in India. That doesn't show up as India spends, but it is actually India specific spend, which is happening somewhere else.
I think that's fairly accurate, because I think that's in FMCG, it's more about localizing that insight and rooting it in something which is fundamental to your culture, rather than you need many new solutions. And even the packaging innovations or the form that he talked about, or the noodles, those are what we would call, that's why I think it doesn't show up in a chart as new to the world. That's why I said there should be a space called thoughtful innovation, because you are improvising, or you're adapting, or you're culturally becoming more relevant, or you are more led by consumer need. What I do believe has changed very much is formulations that reflect local realities a lot more than they did 20 years ago. Because 20 years ago, nobody cared. The brands were so strong, they were big, if you wanted to participate. So it was a very top-down kind of an approach. To the extent that now we're respecting what cultural sensitivities are there, that I think is a first step, Whether you have to formally spend on it, or you can access your global pool, then I think, I don't know how it works in China, but if you have a large pool of local entrepreneurs or homegrown entities in that space, then it would probably show up like that. I think in India, FMCG domination, by very large established brands in that way might be the reason why it will not show up on a chart like that.
Let's just take one example. I mean, let's not go very far. Now, is this innovation? There's a brand of water here which says Jivika Vitamin Water. And nobody, Coke, Pepsi has positioned their water brand as innovation. So it's probably to my mind how we are capturing the data, rather than what is the reality. Because patents may not be the only way innovation happens.
That's true. But overall, do you think that Indian companies match up to their world peers in terms of innovation? So again, not just looking at the outliers like ITC. If you go beyond ITC, do they match up?
Yeah, let's take some examples in the FMCG space, because that's all I have done. I mean, you look at a company like Fog. What is Fog? It's an Ahmedabad-based company, or Baroda-based company. The guy is probably a graduate, but he has overtaken even the levers and everybody else in terms of deodorant market share. And what is it? It's a simple one. If every deodorant has an alcohol, I'll make a water-based deodorant, which will give you double the number of usages. So for a college-going graduate, for a guy who's into college or school, whose value for money is very important in using a deodorant, if that deodorant lasts for 2 months, he's delighted. Now that's innovation. And you may have, Axe may have, I don't know, 500 people doing global innovation, but Axe has half their market share. And Axe is forced to now launch a deodorant like that. Yeah. So I think it is a consumer understanding. A lot of time global companies, I've worked in them and so have you, they miss the local insight. Correct. And their programs are led by global R&Ds, which is the numbers which come up. But it's actually, if you look at the number of Indian innovations or Chinese innovations, which have gone into global launches, into Africa, for example. You may not see a Indian innovation of Lifebuoy in US, but you definitely see a lot of Indian Lifebuoy innovation, for example, in Africa or in Middle East. So I think these are also things one should consider.
I think it's always been there. Nirma and Ghadi are still some of the strongest competitors holding their space. So I completely agree with them. I think if you take 2 examples like Himalaya or a brand called Paras Pharmaceuticals, Move, they're outstanding in what they have been able to achieve in that. So now I think they're caught up in which big company is going to acquire them. But there are homegrown companies and entrepreneurs. In fact, they've been very fleet-footed and they've probably sensed things faster and better. And it's only about scaling it up and things like that which might have gotten to them. So notionally, there is nothing at all which says that, in fact, they are much closer here to the ground. than most others do. So those might be environmental factors that prevented them from, or maybe they didn't have those aspirations. We're sitting in Bangalore, Mayas and MTR, I don't think you have bigger examples than that of the, primarily rescuing all vegetarians like me when we go abroad. We'll be eternally grateful to them. Yeah, today they probably sell more outside than they sell here, so we don't hear a lot about it now because you don't have to convert the converted. But a long time before anyone was talking about all of these mixes and so on, there were companies like GITS and MTR and now Mayas who've transformed that landscape. And it's a very hard thing to actually do from a technological perspective, I would imagine. But they've been doing it.
I think there's some good news for Indian FMCG. Mostly there's good news for Indian consumers and Indian scientists. So I mean those biotechnologists, food technologists, molecular biologists, fabric and chemical engineers. Yeah, good news for them. And the good news is this, for the consumers and the scientists, is there are increasingly large number of Indian companies find the FMCG space lucrative. And they know that the only way they can make headway is by innovating either on product design, commercial innovation, or they go to market models, right? And the examples of Paras, the examples of Himalaya, the examples of MTR, and all of these are good examples. Paras Brothers went and sold Paras, and they now have another company which is again disrupting the spaces that they are in. And that's only one side of the good news. The other side of the good news is that companies like us who've held greater market share, who've been globally at the cutting edge of bringing new features or benefits, know that to win in India, the set that we're competing, 10, 20 years ago, we were competing with people who will copy you at cheaper and faster. Now that's not the only game, right? We are now competing with potentially disruptors who will bring the same benefits in a new form, in a refreshing form, or just in a new form altogether, a new benefit, formulation that we have to kind of fight against, which is making us bring our innovations faster, which is making us innovate locally, not use the same formulation, use the same format. How do you deliver to the Indian consumers? How do you create cost advantage? And there's a lot of kind of back engineering that goes in creating that value advantage for the company to bring stuff to Indian consumers. I'll give you two examples here. One from the chocolates industry and something that I've heard from friends. If Nestle were to use, when Nestle first launched their chocolates here, the chocolates won't last on Indian shelves because the formulations were European and the chocolates would melt at Indian temperatures, right? And retailers still don't have a lot of cooling infrastructure. Right? They had to, and Cadbury's were winning because they had reformulated, in a way, their base with how much cocoa butter goes in and how much flour goes in, so that the chocolate stayed. And Nestle had to do that to make some headway. We make napkins. Our napkins were made originally designed outside India, right? We're competing with some global behemoths as well. We had to provide those napkins at a accessible price with the same benefits. So there's a fair bit of reverse engineering, and it's an engineered product, right? So, and we had to do innovation on how does that product get manufactured. We had a lot of machine engineering so that we deliver the same amount of speed and machine utilization that a multi-million-dollar German platform did for a competitor, and we innovated on Chinese platforms to deliver the same kind of value, and did it in a distributed manufacturing setup across the country, while conventional manufacturers or competition did it out of one center. Now there's a fair bit of work that went behind it. It's not the kind of innovation that Street would ever talk about. It's not the kind of innovation I'd commonly talk about in another forum as well, because that's a lot of value chain innovation that finally is valuable to the consumer, because we could land a product that is of comparable performance to a product which was twice as costly as us and stole share away and provided a great value to the consumer, because as I said before, hundreds of thousands of women went out of, as we say in a recent campaign, we gave them a month in their life every year, because 5 days a month they didn't have practically the same utility of those days.
Let me cover some ground which you already covered. You gave me several examples, but I specifically wanted to ask Sanjay and Kapil on whether you have any other stories on innovation from your respective companies that you want to share with the audience. Or the companies that you worked before, like Dabur, Divas.
Sure. So I'll take a Dabur example because it's an Indian company and would never have the resources which a big company would have, Unilever or J&J or Crickets in terms of R&D. But innovation basically to my mind is common sense. So innovation is not about massive molecular research. It's basically, are you listening to the consumer every day? Do you empathize as a manager, as a marketeer with your consumer? Can you be in the same shoes as your consumer? Can you think like her? And then can you bring out an innovation which actually helps her? So I mean, there are many examples, but let's take an example of as simple as a shampoo, for example. Now, a shampoo is a shampoo, but there can be many, many interesting ways to position it. The fact is, like from a Lakme to a Unilever to a P&G, they were all about basically shampoos and hair oils, which were chemical in nature. And a company like Dabur came in with Vatika, which is now a 1,000 crore brand, basically coming with saying that it has natural ingredients. So those are innovations which actually come from consumer insight, because Indians typically believe in natural solutions. In Ayurvedic and Patanjali, of course, everybody's talked about, so I don't want to talk about any further. One has heard enough. But basically, if you listen to the consumer, I think innovation is everything you do. Innovation can be in packaging, it can be in the way you position, etc., etc. So that's what.
A couple of examples that come to mind, and several that I've spoken about, so I'll be brief here. In terms of innovation that we've done in India for India, it's largely about how do you give the consumer what she values, but what is unconventional. So one space that Indian innovation gets talked about is low cash outlay packs, right? The sachets, the shampoo category exactly bloomed when Schick launched the first sachet, and then Unilever quickly adopted it and made a big game out of it. So when we were trying to access low-income households, providing a product that had low cash outlay was seen to be quite an important factor. What we discovered is that in our space, the consumer valued the brand and the experience that it gave her, but did not want to, was suspect of any company who would have taken away a bit of that value in providing her low cash outlay. She didn't want to feel not cheated, but belittled, because you can't afford to buy the same brand that I sell to everybody else, but now let me give you a way to come in. And we saw a little bit of hesitation on those consumers who won't adapt. So what we did is, instead of going into sachets and cheaper packaging alternates, which allowed a lot of a lot of category players to kind of take what they saw cost out and provide value to consumers, we just miniaturized what we had. Okay, and it was against conventional wisdom. It was argued against that consumers won't pay for the price of it, and the economic value chain won't matter. So we took a soap that used to sell at 40 rupees at that time, and there was another price pack at 25 rupees. And we launched a 10 rupee pack, but which was a miniature of everything. So it had the same carton, it had the same poly pack inside, and it was the same formulation. And there was great amount of advice that was available at that time to look at, unbundle the package altogether, not have the carton, not have the poly pack, do it in a simple pillow pack, and reformulate the soap to save cost out so that we can give it to the consumer at 10 rupee price point or even lower. We didn't. It added more share points, more growth points, more distribution numbers than anybody in the category had done till that time for the next 3 years. And that's because the consumer valued the fact that you were listening to her, that she wanted the whole experience, not just the part of it, for the price that she was willing to pay. And that's something that we are very proud of.
I think creating accessibility, down the pop strata is something that FMCG has typically done beautifully. And also even looking at small things. I mean, years ago, there was a tea brand which thought about, how we make tea in India and we boil our tea. And the biggest problem is that when you filter it out and you have that at the bottom of your cup, That's a terrible experience. And from that was born the inside of a boilable tea bag. So it was called, well, Bulbule at the time. It did not primarily work at that point in time because they did not get their pricing right or their formulation right. They're back now, and there are so many tea innovations. You're taking tea bags for granted in this country today, right? So, but these processes, as Kapil said, take time to perfect. But I think the intent of access, better product in use, and an aspirational product in an affordable format is tremendously empowering and democratizing. So to get the best brands that there are at access points, and that empowers consumers rather than just the 10 off or the 20 off. Like, Indians are very sensitive about being belittled, like he said, or about being copped out of the process. And that's why Maggie latched onto that quickly and put those, 2 wilted cucumbers and 3 wilted carrots, but do not belittle the psychological benefit of that. Because it really helps someone to feel that apart from adding water, they did something in that process. And today there are real carrots and real reconstituted vegetables in it, and so that's a step up too. But innovation that empowers the consumer and co-opts them is far more difficult than saying, you don't understand anything about this technology, just plug and play. I think we accept those in certain aspects of our life. But in FMCG, you can't override me. So way back, Betty Crocker, the first, and you know that the famous story about the cake mix, well, their first set went out and said, just add water, put it in, and it failed miserably. Don't do anything with it was the instruction, but the product didn't work because baking is so fundamental to the American consumer. How could they not do anything? For the first time in the history of innovation, they had to debundle it, reformulate it, and said, just add milk. And it flew. And that's an insight we've learned over. But I'm saying that empowering a consumer, not overriding them, is an important step in innovation in FMCG, which we cannot overemphasize. Because at the end of the day, as a researcher, I'm so happy. Whatever biases I have to myself, I state them up front, and every time the consumer proves us wrong. So that's really, really humbling and good to learn.
Okay. So what I'll do now is I'll open up to questions from the audience, and then I'll come back to the panel and ask them to give some summary comments. So any questions from the audience?
We all have, each one of have tripled the numbers here, right? And yeah, it was really an amazing experience. Now I have 3-4 questions. Should I ask each one, or can I ask all?
So maybe pick the
Okay,
one
right,
question
fine.
that you really want to ask.
Number one is you haven't touched on the Patanjali versus innovation. So it's like the because so that's one area which you need to look in, because I'm an alum from here, and I visited IIT Roorkee for an entrepreneur session, and then I moved into Haridwar. I hooked up with one of the research guy there and went in and spent a day, without knowing people that I am from here or there or whatever. But it's a different story, what we see on the news and what is there in reality. And if you are from ITC, I think you need to visit to know what real it is. So I just want a word on that. That's
So we'll just stick to one question, and then we will distribute to the audience.
Yeah,
Okay. Sure.
Fantastic example of listening to the consumer and being true to what the consumer wants. Because it's a disruption in every way. It's a disruption that one brand can't operate from clothing, yoga clothing, to a atta, to a honey, to a toothpaste. It's a disruption in the sense of how, despite being a mass brand, Patanjali distribution today is the most efficient in terms of margins. When I benchmark my trade margins to a stockist or to a retailer, they have that, or a modern trade like Big Bazaar, Patanjali has the least margins terms to anybody in this country, including MNCs. Number 3, if you look at Patanjali, if my juice gets bad, I take it back. Patanjali doesn't take back a single tin of their ghee if there is a thing. So it's basically the consumer pull which is taking it. That may come from the yoga heritage of Baba. It may come from fantastic supply chain. But the fact is that it's a model of marketing of FMCG that nobody in the world has seen. And that is why it's so disruptive. Having said that, is it a problem for me or for anybody in this room? I don't think so, because when I was in Dabur, I had a problem with Dabur honey, and those are folklore in marketing right now. But the fact is that this guy has come and expanded the market. When the reality is, be it baby soaps, be it juices, be it atta, or milk, the packaged products penetration in this country is what, 20, 30, 40, 50%. And there's room for everybody to grow. So if I look at, for example, where is Patanjali doing well? It's doing well in toothpaste, honey, ghee, right? And these three categories, his entry has actually expanded the category manifold. If you look at household panel data, that's the data we go, saying that how many households bought a product last month, this month, etc. He's actually expanded the category, which is not a bad thing for the industry. I mean, newspapers may go and say that Levers is worried, Colgate is worried. That is just PR to my mind. Actually, he's expanding the category, and to my mind, he's actually making natural stroke Ayurvedic products more famous amongst people or more demanding by consumers, and that can't be a bad thing. And Patanjali is not about discount, right? A lot of Patanjali products like toothpaste, for example, are actually a premium to a Colgate, for example. So I don't think it's actually what people say. It's actually coming from basic insight.
I just wanted to add to what Sanjay said and said that I think you can't compare Patanjali to anyone else, because I have never seen a brand which is, like he said, based on pull in that fashion because of what Baba Ramdev represents. And we've been hearing about him in focus group discussion warm-ups for 15 years now. And the power that he had, even when he was doing those yoga programs, he used to talk about issues which were way beyond what he was immediately doing. So I think his ability to influence people disproportionate to that was always there. And I think the other thing was timing. Because at the time, Ayurvedic and natural products are not new. A number of the brands that we've talked about pre-existed. But I think it met a point in time where there is a matrix of saying an Ayurvedic natural product, fantastic sensorials, and a newfound pride about your own heritage. The combination of those three things at that time, a fantastic spokesperson, to be sure I didn't anticipate that he had such great marketing think behind him that he would do all the things that he subsequently did. My only word of caution there is trust is a very double-edged sword. The more you trust, the harder you fall. So for him to live up to a failure is a far more difficult thing because it's not just a corporate entity, it's about a guru, right? So, so moving so rapidly onto so many categories and being able to meet those quality norms, etc., is the thing. But like Sanjay said, fantastically well done. But I think he's in a league of his own. It's a non-comparable example to anyone else.
I think for students of FMCG businesses in India, this is an instructional phase. There's never been a brand that straddled so many categories with one brand. I mean, Tata's came close to it, but Tata still don't have one brand going across so many categories as Patanjali has. Their speed to market is amazing, unprecedented, and it's an instruction by itself to a lot of us. How well can you do that? And to something that Sanjeev and Nirupama both said, it's finding the consumer pull. So getting your message right, and a lot of us get taught in the age of social media that content is king, and for him, getting that message right consistently across categories is what is creating the pull that he has, and then it's the strength of the brand that allows them to sell at that speed without the margins and a lot of enabling processes that a lot of us have built over years and kind of perfected, and he's disrupting those, and it's instruction for that reason. I think it's but actually their businesses grew and like everybody else's did. And he's entered more personal care, household care categories more recently, and they're seeing action. It's also good news because it'll make a lot of us more agile and respond to what consumers really want. There would always be, India being such a diverse market and a growing market, there will always be a niche for every benefit space. And he owns, most of his brands own a particular benefit space, right? So he would have space there, but it will make us agile to respond to those same benefit spaces or carve our niches more finer, right? So there will be lesser and lesser brands trying to be everything to be everyone, increasingly. And that's not only him. It's in any case in a market that is fast growing and beginning to mature, more niches will appear And I think that space, he's kind of accelerating that to happen.
It is very much a product for the developing countries, and I think it's a great innovation. I feel that some of the products, they are not being promoted properly. For instance, the baby diapers and the adult diapers, which has found a new markets these days. The baby diapers, when they promote it, I think what you just said, that it gives the mother a good night's sleep. That part of it has not been emphasized. It talks about absorbing, and those are the only qualities that it talks about, but it doesn't talk about the additional benefits that the product gives. I think if that is done, then they will find new markets, and I'm sure those markets will expand. It's just an observation.
The innovations which we did in our company, it's not a question. First thing, Cara facial tissue. So facial tissue as a market. See, we sold Pantaloon to Aditya Birla, but we bought Cara from Aditya Birla for 5 crores. But now it's creating 100 crores market for us. So as a tissue, nobody uses tissue for just refreshing tissue. We create a lot of products, aloe vera tissue, makeup tissue, evening tissue, morning tissue, afternoon tissue for office goers and all these things. It's expanded so well because of our retail presence in all over India. The product we marketed very well, that category was not exist because people, it's a new conception. It's a new consumption. That is one thing. Second thing I would like to add, some desi atta. See, the people are migrating from north to south due to software thing, but the food culture it's inside you, actually. What you eat, what all the ingredients you eat, and Jova roti is there in Karnataka. The guy who's going to Gurgaon, who's working for there, that roti ingredients he doesn't get. So what we did a mix from each and every culture, every state. So the rice, that whatever this batter or flour, mix properly put based on the culture. That culture varies every 250 kilometers in India. So these are all the innovations which is not completely, marketed very well, which Future Group is working on it. Second thing I would like to visit, this is on out in market, like ID batter. What they are doing is you can create 99 varieties of those are from single batter, like augmented reality. Everybody is using phone now. Just ID batter, what they are doing to do is just put one small card, put your camera phone. Every time the chef will instruct you new varieties of how to make your dosas very unique and unique taste. So these are a lot of innovations are happening, which is not getting noticed. That's what I'd like to add in this forum. That's it.
I have a question. In fact, this is in relation to the slide which was shared by Professor. In the slide, there was a correlation between the GDP versus innovation. And some of you have also touched that thing. Do you really feel that the investment is really important with regards to R&D? Can a country like India, where, yeah, I do agree our GDP is growing, but at the same time we have different focuses. Can we not think of continuing R&D with the limited resources we have? Reverse innovation.
Reverse innovation. I think you gave some examples of innovations from India going to Africa, but what about from India, China to US and Europe?
I think reverse innovation is working very strongly in the region already. So I think, for example, we've started doing a lot of work in, let's say, Myanmar. And a lot of Indian brands are already there. Africa, like he mentioned.
Yeah, but beyond going to comparable countries with similar
yes,
income levels,
it can,
how about
provided
going to Europe,
they
Japan and US?
yes, provided they have a world view, and provided they're not rooted only in a cultural insight. Otherwise, we're going to end up selling to all NRIs everywhere. Now, even now, if you go to a grocery store in the US, you find many better brands than what we find in India. So the best mangoes are not here, but there. So, but that I think is only catering to a niche. I wish there were more examples of us, which in technology, etc., we've been able to take across, right? I think in the FMCG space, the next pass will be that. If you looked at broad metrics like, is Indian food now becoming more popular, and is vegetarianism as a principle becoming more important? Yes. Is yoga much more popular? Yes, but we were not at the forefront of it because another IP opportunity lost. So I think if we are trapped in that narrow thing of actually replicating a ghetto mentality everywhere, then we will not be able to let people participate in the reverse innovation process to the extent we should. It's an opportunity. I don't think we've leveraged it sufficiently.
I mean, but let me give one example maybe. I mean, you'll be shocked and surprised to hear that company like Dabur, which you'll think is Ayurvedic, to India mein bikta hoga, 40%, 45% of its business comes from outside India. Because even in US, people value Ayurveda. And these are like brands like Vatika, etc., which are, and that natural interpretation by a company like Dabur is not only in shampoos, it's also in hair mousses and hair sprays. Which, because the reality is that consumers want natural solutions. They want solutions which are not chemical. So there are companies doing that, including Godrej, and I'm sure even in the J&J world there are examples which are there. And the fact is even Estee Lauder and L'Oreal, look at some of the biggest platforms. The biggest trend they are doing is Ayurvedic hair oils in US, for example. So I think there are small examples. The scale of Indian companies doesn't allow them to go and invest $1 billion in advertising in US. But I think there'll be a time when it will happen.
Another example, like Sanjay mentioned, virgin coconut oil. If you were to go into Amazon right now, the number of hits that you will get on virgin coconut oil, and it's like storming the US and Europe. Now in India, if you ask somebody about coconut oil, they're like, virgin coconut oil is like coconut oil with less goodness of coconut oil in it, then I don't need it. That's like refined mustard oil. Either I like mustard oil, and if I don't like mustard oil, then refining it won't make a difference to me. But virgin coconut oil, actually the origination, so I think there are lots of sales that are made out of here to them. But and therefore, as a conceptually, coconut oil came from here to markets like this. But it is after, I think, the Western Europe and US, where it is like magic bullet. People think Alzheimer's, etc., can be sort of dealt with. It's that powerful. It's not just a food product. But there are markets like Philippines, for example, which are very big on it. Southeast Asia is very big on it. India is currently sells it, but in a is not through recognizable brands. So you won't see it coming up on the radar like that. But even now, if you were to go and hit Amazon or Flipkart, you'll see 10 brands which you've never heard of listed talking about virgin coconut oil. So there are big things coming on all those fronts. How branded they become and how consistently Indian they appear to be, that is a question, I think.
I have.
So one last question with you.
So I mean, we represent and we support R&D centers for the FMCG, and we do work with Johnson & Johnson, Unilever, and also with ITC. So my question is basically with respect to what Professor highlighted about the Indian innovation part. So the little experience what we have, the majority of the R&D happens for MNCs even in India, but the priority is actually based on what the headquarter talk about. Now, when it comes to Indian companies, they do wait for some of the MNCs or the company outside India to come first in terms of innovation, what they do. So in our interactions, whenever we see the amount of investment what they do in R&D is actually subjected to what the CFO and the CEO actually kind of defines what is important at that point of time, because they tend to follow what Western country or European country is doing. Is it something really creating the R&D team to suppress or hide some of the greatest innovations what they are trying to do and wait for Western countries to come first, and then we just follow with changing the package or changing the size? So why those investments are not happening directly in India as a first go?
I can't speak for Indian companies, but I'll tell you what MNCs like us are doing for markets like India. We're trying to identify insights and needs which are more universal, but get them to developing markets like India faster by developing them for India or in India. It can be a combination of either. It doesn't have to be developed in India to be developed for India. A lot of our work, development work that happens for India happens right now in Singapore and Shanghai. Kind of spaces that we are in, we are not pure FMCG, we're the cusp of healthcare and cosmetics. So a lot of healthcare, science, and clinical trials go behind it. So you need the infrastructure set up for that, and which is why we tend to do it in one place and where we have the access to talent and access to such procedures. And but it's not, as from where I sit and observe from what we are doing, a lot more organizational investment and organizational dollars going behind R&D for producing for markets like India. There's another model that we are trying to adopt, especially in Asia, is partner-enabled or vendor-enabled innovation. We recognize that a lot of our vendors are more agile and nimble, and they understand the local context much faster. So for some of our businesses in India, we partner with our vendors, the third-party manufacturers who innovate on their platforms that we license for them. In our sanitary napkins products, in some of our OTC products, because the Indian regulations are somewhat different, sometimes behind the Western regulations. So those vendors kind of help us innovate here. And again, it does not come up on our balance sheet as R&D spend, because it will only come up as, on the top line when we finally commercialize that innovation. In Asia, in North Asia, we're partnering with a lot of incubation setups which are doing cosmetics. So we have a partnership with a company called Cosmax in Korea. And Korea is the cutting edge of beauty, personal care, cosmetics innovation. And we shipped about half a dozen products last year and some more, which are coming out of a partnership with Cosmax, and we're shipping them across Asia, commercializing them. So from where I sit, a lot more investment in winning for markets like India. What are Indian companies doing? I don't think increasingly Indian companies are sitting behind and letting the big multinationals do it. I think paperboard is a good example. A lot of expertise in paperboard actually came out of Coke, because the two people who started it were groomed in Coke, right? The advice and counsel that they got from veterans like Nirupama and others were with experiences with multinationals, but they didn't wait for somebody else to do armrests or armpanna. They took, and they kind of, in their own way, disrupted that business for a fair bit.
Okay, so we are out of time for questions from the audience. I'll ask the panelists to sort of give some summary thoughts on what are the best practices for innovations, some of it which you already shared, but if you can quickly summarize, take about 2 to 3 minutes each. Yeah.
I think we've covered this ground a fair bit. One is that I think FMCG innovation, as we've already said, is really consumer-based innovation, then scaled up and made. So I think the more you listen and more you watch and observe, so essentially it has to answer a need. It has to be based on insight. So I would say that would be half of it. And the second thing, which is true not just for FMCG, but everywhere else as well, is that the attitude of treating innovation as an event or a workshop, as opposed to continuously working on it. And so I think it's frustrating as a facilitator to see that there are so many brilliant ideas that workshops yield, and yet doing the incremental steps on a day-to-day basis, and not just populating your funnel on one grand day with 30 ideas and none of them actually, because walking the talk is much more difficult than actually arriving at the ideas. There are no shortage of those, and really their practices are in place about having cross teams, about having R&D people, about having marketing people, analysts, all of them together. So I think that innovation is not an event, and the more you can actually make it a cultural, break it up on a day-to-day basis, the more you will be doing that. And just broadly from my experience, I feel that when brands are in a position of strength, taking that opportunity to innovate is quite different from innovating in a crisis or against competitive action. We've seen a lot of the latter. I think we're beginning to see the former, and you'll see better and different kinds of innovation on the back of that. Yeah.
Taking a different flavor from Nirupama, I think innovation, as they say in marketing, is more art and science. It's both of them. Because one great idea can come to anyone, but how do you structure it, especially in a multinational, but even in an Indian company? Because you have 500 stakeholders, right from your packaging, I mean, there are some students here, right from packaging to your boss to your research agency. And how do you actually keep the mix alive? How do you do a time-based moving innovation between various stages, from conceptualization to testing with consumers? That is really the holy grail. And companies like Unilever, P&G, J&J, which have perfected that, they're doing that because they're able to bring out that in a timely manner, and they are able to be, let's say, honest to the original idea. So it's more the discipline rather than having one bright idea, because ideas are cheap, execution is expensive, and that's what is, I think, the critical one.
Thank you, and then I'll just try and wrap up the themes that I picked up from the conversation. And I'd say there are 4 points around FMCG innovation, at least in the Indian context. First, don't look at us for a Steve Jobs kind of innovation. We're not in the business of truth. We will add incremental value to our consumers' life where consumers value that right now. So that's the first space, right? Those of us who will win in that space are those who will co-opt trends which are emerging outside. So the second thing so you will, very rarely you will find molecular, format, structural, path-breaking innovation coming first from FMCG. But you'll see those of us who win in FMCG are the ones who will adapt to that. To my point about 32 out of 35 innovations that Prof. Sai talked about, FMCG in some ways are already adapted to in India. So those of us who adapt all of those changes, then consumers' habits already, whether it's use of apps, use of internet, use of geotagging, will win. So that's the second space. The third space, a lot of us innovation, especially in FMCG in India, will not be visible, neither to the consumer nor to the academia, which is because it will be done on the business model and the value chain to keep us competitive against each other, to make change. And consumers will eventually pay give us the value for it, but not recognizing as an innovation. We acquired a brand a couple of years ago, our first ever acquisition in India, and we innovated on the business model, how we went to the market, how we generated demand. There was a version A, which is done classically the consumer way, how you sell juices, and there's a version B on how you sell medicine. And we innovated just on the business model of, we created demand on how you create demand for medicine, and we served it how you sell juices. And the consumer realizes this because she can find a prescription and buy it like an OTC product, and that's where we're deriving a value out. But this is not something that will be visible to a lot of people, right? So a lot of innovation in FMCG will happen in the value chain, and the business models will not be visible. The fourth space, I think, what is happening with a lot of our talent is millennial, and they don't like doing stuff the way it was done 20 years ago, right? So a lot of us, and just not for large corporations, even for small, and there's a desire to be startup-ish, even if you're not in a startup, right? So, and a lot of us value that. So I think everybody in their own ways will foster internal innovation a lot. We have a platform called Ideas Big and Small right now, where people can put in any kind of an idea, okay? And it's a bit like Facebook and a venture funding concept in between. You put up an idea, people promote it, like it. It sees a certain threshold, it goes to a powered committee, it comes to the board, it gets an endorsement, it gets into commercialization, okay? And it could be anything from a product idea to write a report differently for the field rep, because innovation can happen in place. So in the last 6 months, we've had some 200 ideas and 35 commercializations. And it spans, as I said, product idea to write a report new. And I think that's the spirit, with millennial talent coming in to work for a lot of us, and us competing for talent versus some of the more fashionable, technology innovation spaces for the same talent. I think it will force us to be more innovative in how we do work within. And those are the 4 kind of trends that I think are meaningful for us right now.
Yeah, so just to build on your point, the 4 of us are from 90s, so we got in when the economy opened up, but the people joining now are the people who are born after the economy opened up, and they have a very different perspective on how things should be done, and that's good news for innovation. Yeah. So several of you had questions for the panelists. Maybe you could do it offline, one-on with them. So we're out of time, so we'll just close this. So really very useful discussion. I personally learned a lot about innovation in the FMCG space.